There's no discussion about gun violence in Chicago without talking about Indiana. Because the violence and the mothers that we have to comfort are losing children due to the guns and the carnage and the lawlessness unleashed by those states.
During a high-profile House hearing, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez launched into one of her trademark tangents, passionately arguing her case for stricter gun control and attempting to justify why certain firearms should be taken out of the hands of everyday Americans. She spoke forcefully, trying to frame the issue as a matter of public safety. But before she could fully settle into her argument, Congressman Clay Higgins stepped in. With the calm confidence of someone who has seen this debate play out many times before, he delivered one sharp, pointed line that instantly cut through her entire narrative. The room shifted, AOC's momentum stalled, and the exchange quickly became the moment everyone was talking about. What was supposed to be a routine discussion suddenly turned into a viral political showdown, one that left AOC visibly frustrated and Higgins standing firm.
Let's talk facts here. There was a lot of discussion about New York City. There is no discussion about gun violence in New York City without discussing the iron pipeline that is Florida, Georgia, South Carolina, North Carolina, Virginia, Pennsylvania, and honorary mention to Ohio, where 70% of likely illegal trafficked guns found in New York City come from.
That's exactly why today we're breaking the whole situation down from start to finish. Without the noise, without the drama, and without taking anyone's side. We're not here to push an agenda, we're here to focus on plain, simple, common sense. If you're the kind of person who likes to think for yourself, who prefers facts over hype and clarity over confusion, then you're in the right place. Make sure you hit that subscribe button, settle in, and let's dive straight into what really went down.
There's no discussion about gun violence in Chicago without talking about Indiana. Because the violence and the mothers that we have to comfort are losing children due to the guns and the carnage and the lawlessness unleashed by those states. I move on. Every week in recent memory, we have had at least one mass shooting. This is not normal. Not only is it not normal, it is internationally embarrassing and delegitimizing to the United States.
AOC's point here is straightforward. She argues that the so-called iron pipeline allows guns purchased legally in states with more relaxed firearm laws, places like Florida, and be trafficked illegally into major cities such as New York. In her view, this turns the issue into one of interstate supply, shifting the responsibility onto red states and suggesting that lax policies elsewhere are directly fueling violence in more regulated areas. It's an argument centered almost entirely on the supplier, while downplaying or overlooking the criminal intent of the person actually committing the act. She repeats this pattern when addressing the violence in Chicago, pointing once again to its neighboring state of Indiana as a major contributor of illegally trafficked firearms. In AOC's framing, the core problem is the flow of guns across state lines, not the individuals choosing to use them for violence.
Now let's talk about why. Let's talk about one thing more important to lobbyists and the gun industry than children, than houses of faith, than human beings. Let's talk about profit. In 2020, again, more than 45,000 Americans by gunfire, reflecting an almost threefold increase from 2015. Are those statistics correct?
That's accurate.
So in your view, are you seeing a correlation between gun profits and gun deaths in the United States?
Yes.
So yeah, it does come off as a bit ironic hearing this from someone whose own party put Joe Biden in the White House and ran Kamala Harris as vice president net. Now, she's suddenly concerned about how other countries perceive America. It wasn't that long ago that the former president looked completely lost at certain international events, raising far more global eyebrows than anything AOC is talking about. And then there's Chicago, a city with some of the strictest gun laws in the entire nation. It's true that nearly half of the guns used in crimes there are traced back to other states. But that statistic actually proves the opposite point of what AOC is trying to argue. If anything, it shows that people determined to break the law will always find a way, regardless of how many regulations are stacked on the books. You don't have to look far for proof. Countries like Canada and several across Europe enforce extremely strict gun laws. Yet violence still exists, and criminals simply shift to other weapons when guns become harder to access. But AOC didn't stop there.
For context, the NRA spent about $250 million in 2020 alone. That's more than twice the entire salary of Congress combined. In 1 year, lobbying against gun safety laws. There's also this discussion about anything but a gun, but that these are about violent people, but yet we aren't doing anything about addressing the actual root causes of misogyny, where 2/3 of mass shootings are connected to domestic violence, or the emergence of white supremacy radicalization, mass incarceration, and poverty, and the connections between that and mass shootings in our communities. I yield my time. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Yes, AOC frames a very specific argument. She draws a direct connection between the financial health of the arms industry and the overall rate of fatalities nationwide, suggesting that profits and influence play a role in perpetuating gun violence. At this point, her focus shifts entirely away from the weapons themselves and zeroes in on the money and politics behind the debate. She paints a picture of massive corporate lobbying, idler spending, and strategic efforts aimed at blocking any meaningful safety legislation. After laying out these sweeping financial claims, she then pivots, attempting to redirect the discussion toward what she calls the actual root causes of violence, a move that critics argue is designed to divert attention from the shortcomings and failures of her own party's policies.
I'm going to bring us back in time to World War II. America's population, 140 million. 15 million American men came home from World War II. And there was weapons everywhere. We'll talk about mental challenge. My father was one of those men who was a Navy pilot in World War II. He came back from the war and built his family. I'm the 7th of his 8 children. We had guns everywhere. There was virtually no regulation. Any child in the 50s could buy a weapon from any seller if Daddy sent them with the money. We didn't have mass shootings. It wasn't until 1968 in America that serial numbers were even required on weapons sold in this country. You order weapons through the Sears catalog by the mail.
First off, dragging identity politics into the gun debate is exactly what we don't need. It only clouds the real issues and muddies the facts. Second, someone should remind AOC that correlation does not equal causation. And third, tossing around raw numbers without proper context proves very little. For example, in 2023, nearly 47,000 people died from gun-related injuries. That same year, motor vehicle accidents claimed over 43,000 lives. And even simple falls accounted for almost 47,000 deaths. So, do we ban cars or stop people from walking upstairs? Obviously not. The takeaway is simple. Throwing statistics at a problem without honest discussion or common sense gets you nowhere. Thankfully, Congressman Clay Higgins was there to cut through the noise, bring some clarity, and provide a perspective grounded in reality. Let's take a closer look at exactly what he had to say.
You know what these houses did not have that were built 100 years ago in cities in America? You know what they did not have, Commissioner? Locks. Now I ask you all, what happened to that country, man? A country where homes were built in cities with no locks. A country where guns were everywhere and virtually not regulated at all. Where millions of Americans, 14 million Americans came back. It's 11% of the population at the time after World War II. And here we sit today where an entire once proud Democratic Party is presenting unbelievably unconstitutional laws to press upon our nation, and we have a police commissioner that says he would go home to home and confiscate legally owned weapons.
This is the uncomfortable conversation nobody really wants to have on for good reason. One key factor is the breakdown of family structures over the decades. Years ago, two-parent households were far more common, but today that dynamic has shifted significantly, impacting how young people grow up and make decisions. Another important consideration is how we define these violent incidents. Today, a mass shooting can be labeled as any event where one or more individuals fire at victims, regardless of the number of fatalities. That's a major change from the federal government's previous definition, which required at least 4 deaths for an incident to be classified as a mass shooting, a shift largely driven by media coverage. And then there's the pursuit of fame. Sociologists have repeatedly shown that the desire for notoriety drives many of these attacks. It's a consistent and well-documented trend. Congressman Clay Higgins highlighted this point himself, sharing a personal story from his own experience and offering insights that cut through the noise, shedding light on the root causes that often go unspoken. At the end of the day, it really comes down to one simple truth. Guns are just inanimate objects. Without intent, they pose no real threat. Of course, smarter regulations can play a role in reducing harm, and that's a conversation worth having, but it all has to stay within the bounds of the Second Amendment. Step outside those boundaries, and you're entering the territory of government overreach and infringing on the individual rights the Constitution guarantees. So, what do you think? Drop your thoughts in the comments, share your perspective, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more. And as always, keep thinking, question the narrative, and look for the facts behind the headlines.